Welcome here at the Language Teaching Podcast, where we examine cutting edge methods for teaching languages and their applicability at the Centro Cultural ColomboAmericano. This series will focus on post-method pedagogy, a theory of language instruction that emphasizes the role of context and the learner's agency. Traditional methods of teaching languages, which largely emphasize grammar and rote memorization, are no longer adequate in a world where global communication is more crucial than ever. Contrarily, post-method pedagogy strives to prepare students for communication in real world by enhancing their capacity to comprehend and apply the language in context, as well as their capacity for self-reflection. We'll go over several applications of post-method pedagogy in language instruction and share real-world examples of this pedagogy at the Centro Cultural ColomboAmericano. Come along as we examine how post-method pedagogy could revolutionize language teaching and learning. Post-method pedagogy is an approach to language teaching that places emphasis on the value of context and the learner's responsibility for their own learning process. This method implies that conventional language teaching methods are ineffective at training students to communicate in real-world settings. Instead, post-method pedagogy concentrates on improving the learner's comprehension and use of the language in context, as well as their capacity for self-reflection. The fact that post-method pedagogy solves some of the drawbacks of conventional methods is one of the main reasons it is seen as a crucial subject in language education. For instance, traditional approaches frequently fall short of giving students the real-world context they need to comprehend and effectively use the language. Traditional approaches also frequently discourage reflection on the learning process and learner autonomy, both of which are essential for success as language learners. On the other hand, post-method pedagogy attempts to equip the students with the abilities and information they need to communicate effectively in everyday settings and to develop into independent and reflective learners. It is a method that emphasizes the significance of social cultural approach, multimodality, task-based learning, learner autonomy, communicative competence, and authenticity in language education. Post-method pedagogy can be extremely effective in ensuring that language learners are ready to succeed in real-world situations in a world where international communication is more significant than ever. The limitations of traditional methods. When it comes to preparing students for in person conversation, traditional language teaching approaches have significant drawbacks. These restrictions include, among others, number one, the lack of real world context. Traditional methods typically concentrate on teaching grammar rules and vocabulary lists without giving students the context they require to comprehend and apply the language correctly in real world settings. Number two, prioritizing accuracy over fluency. Conventional approaches frequently prioritize language usage accuracy over fluency and efficient communication. As a result, students may have hesitation or self consciousness when speaking in authentic settings. Three, lack of communication emphasis. Conventional approaches frequently place more emphasis on decontextualizing language teaching than on fostering students' communicative competence or their capacity to use a language effectively in a variety of settings. Four, learners' limited role. In traditional approaches, students frequently play a limited part in their own learning, with the teacher serving as the main source of information and instruction. This might make students passive and less likely to take charge of their own education. 5. Traditional methods tend to rely on a one way information transmission from teachers to students rather than encouraging active conversation and engagement between learners. Traditional methods limitations can make it difficult for students to communicate successfully in real world circumstances and to build the skills and confidence necessary to be successful language learners. Post method pedagogy, on the other hand, seeks to solve these constraints by immersing learners in real world context, emphasizing fluency in communicative ability, encouraging learners' autonomy, reflective practice, and fostering contact and communication among students. Kumaravadivelu and his three-dimensional system. Although coined by John Fiske in 1989, the term post-method was made popular by Professor Kumaravadivelu in the 90s. As Chen mentioned in 2014, Kumaravadivelu has a three-dimensional view of post-method pedagogy with three pedagogic parameters: particularity, practicality, and possibility. Chan went on to explain that the three pedagogic parameters interact with each other in a synergic relationship. The parameter of particularity requires that any language pedagogy must be sensitive to a particular group of teachers, teaching a particular group of learners, pursuing a particular set of goals within a particular institutional context, embedded in a particular social cultural milieu. Local educational, institutional, and social context have to be duly considered. The parameter of practicality refers to the relationship between theory and practice and the practice of classroom teaching. If the theory and practice are separated and the theorist's role is greater than the teacher's, then it means that the teacher's potential to generate theories from practice and his or her potential to put theories into practice are overlooked. Kumaravadivelu, cited by Chen, claims that the pedagogy of practicality seeks to enable teachers themselves to theorize from their practice and practice what they theorize. The parameter of possibility mainly comes from the educational philosophy of the Brazilian critical pedagogist Paulo Freire. He and his fellow researchers point out that any pedagogy is closely connected with power and dominance and is implemented to create and sustain social inequalities. They call for the recognition of learners and teachers' subject positions, in example, their class, race, gender, and ethnicity, and for sensitivity toward their impact on education. The awareness learners bring to the pedagogical settings are not only influenced by what they learn from the classroom, but also are cultured by a broader social, economic, and political environment in which they grow up. Such awareness may alter pedagogic practices in ways unintended and unexpected by policy planners, curriculum designers, or textbook compilers. Post method pedagogy evidenced at the Centro Cultural ColomboAmericano. Though many principles of post method pedagogy are evidenced in classes at the ColomboAmericano, authenticity, communicative competence, learner autonomy, task based learning, reflective practice, social cultural approach, and multimodality are just some of the most visible. These principles also constitute a crucial part of the observation form advisors use in their class observations. Authenticity is the use of authentic materials and activities that offer students with real world context. We can see this when teachers use actual news articles, films, or audio recordings in the target language, or having learners do tasks that are relevant to their own lives' interest. Instead of textbook dialogues, we have seen teachers use real life films, discussions, or recordings of native speakers in a conversation. The communicative competence is the capacity to use the language effectively in a variety of settings. This can be accomplished through activities that require meaningful use of the language, such as role playing, discussion, or debate, all of which are common examples of activities found at the Colombo Americano. Learner autonomy is encouraging learners to take an active role in their own learning and to reflect on their own learning process. This can be accomplished by allowing learners to select their own learning activities or resources, or by allowing them to time to reflect on their own learning process. At the Colombo, teachers allow students to reflect on their achievement of the objectives with the can do statements and sample questions, which they can find in the pacing. Task based learning is centering learning on tasks and activities that require utilizing the language in meaningful ways rather than grammatical rules and vocabulary lists. Task based activities allow students to bridge the knowledge gap between what they know and what they need to know to complete the task. This inductive approach is seen in different classrooms since it is a criteria found in the observation form. Reflective practice is to reflect on one's own teaching practice while remaining open to change and experimentation. This can be accomplished through examining and assessing one's practice on a regular basis, as well as asking for feedback from students and colleagues. At the Colombo Americano, advisors play a crucial role with class observations and the call for reflection they have with their teachers. Social cultural approach. Language teaching should consider the learner's culture and social background, as well as the cultural and social environment in which the language is utilized. Teachers at the Colombo explore the target culture and bring the discussion back to their own cultural context, comparing and contrasting both. Though this is something we need to strengthen. Multimodality. A crucial principle of post method pedagogy is the use of various modes of communication, including text, audio, video, and graphics. Many teachers at the Colombo go beyond the textbook and bring to the class authentic materials which helps the class become meaningful. These are just a few examples of how language teachers at the Colombo Americano have successfully implemented post method pedagogy consciously or unconsciously in their classrooms by using authentic materials, promoting communicative competence, fostering learner autonomy, incorporating reflective practice, social cultural approach, and multimodality. Teachers can create a more effective and engaging learning environment for their students. In this episode, we've discussed the limitations of traditional methods of language teaching, which rely heavily on grammar and rote memorization, and how post-method pedagogy addresses these limitations. We've covered Kumaravathy Velu's three-dimensional view and examined some key principles of post-method pedagogy, including authenticity, communicative competence, learner autonomy, task-based learning, reflective practice, social-cultural approach, and multimodality, all of which can be evidenced in the different classrooms at the Colombo Americano. We hope that this episode has given you a deeper understanding of post-method pedagogy and its potential to transform language teaching and learning. We encourage you to explore post-method pedagogy further and to consider how you can incorporate its principles into your own teaching practice. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon with another episode of the Language Teaching Podcast.